Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prove It To Me. I'm your host, Dr. Matt Law. I hope everyone's doing well today and is looking forward to a relaxing weekend. Perhaps you'll take a walk outside, enjoy some time with family or friends, or just stay in your PJs, pet your dog, and binge watch a good show, or enjoy some good old American football. Whatever it is, I hope you are able to put yourself in a good mental spot this weekend, away from the hustle and bustle of the week. See, I care about you and I want to make sure you are taken care of, genuinely. Now, on an ad supported podcast, this is where we would bring up the latest and greatest talk therapy service. As of this recording, this is not an ad supported podcast. It is a Dr. Matt Law supported podcast. So today, I have the next best thing for your mental well being. My guest today is a licensed marriage and family therapist, workplace mental health consultant and trainer, and certified professional life coach at Building Families According to Pattern LLC. With a background in environmental engineering, she brings a systems thinking approach to corporate mental health, designing strategic coaching and training solutions that reduce stress, build resilience, and enhance well being. She partners with organizations to advance psychological health and safety, crisis response, and leadership development, driving employee engagement, retention, and performance. She has delivered high impact keynotes and technical presentations for the ASSP, NSC, General Motors, Veriforce, Georgia Safety Conference, and more. Since 2022, she has led mental health initiatives for L'Oreal, facilitating programs for emergency response teams, frontline leaders, and HR professionals. As a safety-focused trainer with ASSP, she champions wellness among safety professionals. Widely recognized in both traditional and digital media, she is a trusted voice on workplace mental health and employee well-being. Please welcome Georgia Bryce-Hutchinson. Hi, Georgia. Welcome to the podcast. So glad you could join us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt.
I'm excited to talk to you today. You've got a very interesting background, a lot of interesting things that I think we can talk about that are going to be very relevant to health and safety professionals in a very interesting way. So let's just start there. You have a background that is really unique to the guests that we've had on this podcast. Plus, many of our listeners come from that environmental safety and health field and may not initially get how your background and your role relates to what we do. So tell me about your background and how you got into working in this space.
Sure. So, I started off working as an environmental scientist. My bachelor's degree is in environmental health and environmental studies. So I started off working with the county when I lived in Miami. For about 7 years, I worked with the Department of Environmental Resources Management. So we were like the local arm of the EAP. So we dealt with like Title CFR 40. That's what we were guided by. And I worked in that arena for about 7 years. And then I went back to school and I got an environmental engineering degree, a master's degree in environmental engineering, working in an engineering and construction space for about a little bit over 9 years. Where I had the opportunity to engage or cross paths with environmental health and safety and OHS professionals. So I have some idea about OSHA and many of the things that govern the environmental health and safety space. And interestingly enough, that's where I met one of my very good friends who's an EHS professional. We maintained relationships over the years, and in a sort of way, she was my segue into getting into the space where I'm dealing with this particular arena. So, as an environmental engineer working in the field for a number of years, I decided to go back to school for marriage and family therapy. And I know that's a huge shift because, when you think therapy, it's like north and south from an engineering background. But somehow, Matt, I've been able to integrate both worlds. Back in 2020, during the height of the pandemic, this friend of mine who's an EHS professional, she was tasked to do a presentation on how getting back into the workspace, what it would look like in the midst of a pandemic. And she expressed that she wanted to address things from a mental health standpoint. But of course, she didn't know anything about mental health, but she knew somebody who does. And so we started doing work in that regard. We pitched proposals to the NSC's conference and the ASSP's conference, and we were able to get in to have conversations around, amplifying mental health in the workspace, because that's very important. And so that's pretty much how my trajectory has been. Over the last 4 years, I've had the opportunity to present at a number of AHS, OHS-led conferences, do trainings with health and safety professionals, work with safety focus, to provide training for health and safety professionals. And that's how it pretty much evolved. I've become a subject matter expert as it relates to mental health, and being able to bridge the gap between health and safety, which often focuses a lot on, traditional physical hazards, but now bringing the psychological piece into play.
So, fortunately, we've talked a bit about mental health on this podcast, but really not a lot about therapy. So, what does therapy look like in the business world?
So when you ask this question, I'll tell you the first thought that came to my mind. I remember back in 2015 when I was in school for marriage and family therapy, there's a professor who he does work in the corporate space. He's the only person I knew back then that actually went into the business arena and do work. And so when everybody else was talking about wanting to finish school and get into private practice, my eyes were always set on doing corporate work, right? And so I went to him and I said, okay, what does this look like? And so, at the time, and it still is the case, there is significant stigma around mental health. We'll talk about that a little bit more because it's kind of eased somewhat. But I remember he said to me, Georgia, it's pretty much the same thing that we do in a regular therapy setting, right? But he doesn't call himself a therapist in the business space. He calls himself a human system consultant, because again, the stigma around mental health was so strong. But the reality is this, Matt, people are people everywhere. You're dealing with the same people, whether it's outside of the workspace or within the context of work itself. And so you're really dealing with human behaviors. You're dealing with human needs. You're dealing with interpersonal challenges. The only difference is that it's in a broader setting in a workspace. So when we think of therapy in the work arena, I wouldn't necessarily label it therapy per se, but we think in terms of leadership and teams. You're working on issues of communication, conflict management, building cohesion in your team. So whether it's, focusing on what matters in terms of values or visions, or building trust, or creating psychological safety. You're thinking about psychoeducation, stress management, self-care, again, mental health literacy in the workspace, helping to amplify or amplify the importance of mental health as you would do physical health. And then you're looking at a systems approach. You're addressing the impact of the environment on the worker, right? So we know about, in your arena, you talk a lot about exposure and risk mitigation and psychological hazards, physical hazards, psychological hazards. So a lot of what I would do in my capacity, it centers training, it centers speaking, it centers probably having group sessions or wellness coaching, but it's the same kind of dynamic as you would do outside of the work environment in a therapy space. It's just bringing it into a broader setting. That's all.
I want to go a little bit off script here just to say I think this is absolutely fascinating. And it's been interesting to watch the safety profession evolve over the years. We have barely scratched the surface on these topics. And I think there have been a lot of different attempts at doing that in different spaces, whether it be behavioral based safety or psychological safety. And like I said, we barely scratch the surface when we talk about these things. What this profession really needs is to be able to rely on subject matter experts from outside of our realm, like yourself, to really dig into these topics. And I'm so excited that you're here today to talk about these things.
Yeah, and I'm happy to be here. And I've always maintained, in all the forums I've been in, one of the things I've always maintained is that we're not necessarily asking health and safety professionals to become mental health experts. No, you have people like me to partner with. And there are lots of people in my field who are willing and open to get in with you in the trenches to take care of this part of the human experience. Because again, Matt, You're dealing with people. You can't separate the person from the worker. The person is bringing him or herself into the workspace, and you're still dealing with that individual with the same unique needs, the same unique challenges, the same unique behaviors that's confronting them on the outside of work.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now, earlier you had mentioned the pandemic sort of in
Uh-huh.
passing in your experience. And I know, like myself, probably most folks are tired of talking about the COVID pandemic. But in this case, it might actually be a pretty crucial factor. How did the pandemic affect the organizational approach to mental health and psychosocial hazards?
I'd say significantly, had a significant impact. As much as COVID created so much pain and loss for so many people, the flip side to COVID is that to me it has been the gift that keeps on giving, because one of the things I know that COVID did is that it impacted everyone in the hierarchy of an, if you think of an organization. So not was it just, not only were employees struggling during the pandemic, leaders were also struggling. So in a sort of sense, COVID kind of leveled the playing field. So, you were probably impacted directly by it because you probably got sick, or you had family members that got sick. Unfortunately, some people had lost, they lost family members as a result of it. And it was not just subjected to people who were just employees. Leaders were also struggling in that regard. So in a way, it kind of brought everybody to the same space. I think COVID also it drew on the collective attention of organizational leaders regarding the importance of mental health awareness. Like, this is just one of those things you could not afford to ignore, because people were coming back into the workspace and they were struggling with grief, they were struggling with loss, they were struggling with anxiety. Some people were dealing with depression. And again, because you can't separate the person of the worker from the worker, as much as though we could seek to compartmentalize our lives, the reality is whatever was happening to me at home was going to be filtering into the workspace, and work is going to be filtering into my personal life. And so, it really created a sense of urgency, I believe, for not all organizational leaders. Some are still coming along, but it was almost like a wake-up call, like, okay, we're dealing with employees who are struggling with mental illness right now, and it is very obvious. And if they're struggling with mental illness, it is going to affect work productivity. It's going to be affecting our bottom line, which is to make money. So this is an area that we can't afford to ignore anymore. We're going to have to get involved and find ways to help our employees address the challenges that they're facing from a mental health standpoint. I know that there has certainly been a cultural shift in conversations around mental health in the workplace. I mean, more people are reporting. It says that, I think there's a statistics out there that says 4 in 10 employees are reporting struggling with severe mental illness. So whereas they were always probably struggling with it, now people are beginning to talk. Now people are beginning to say, the same way my company provides support from a physical standpoint, we also want you to put mental health on the same parity as you do our physical care. And so we want resources to in our work environment. And a lot of companies are realizing, no, if they want to attract and retain top talent, this is an area that they're also going to have to put a focus on.
So, speaking of how this is affecting work, there's a certain way that we measure environmental health and safety effectively to make sure that we're addressing those things effectively. So, when you and I talked before, you mentioned that mental health may not be as cut and dry as many of the other data driven interventions we use in environmental health and safety. And that's weird to me as a quantitative
Of
person.
course, you're into numbers and you're into data.
So tell me a little bit more about the subjectivity in this area.
Yeah, this is what makes mental health a little bit tricky, because when we talk about mental health, what we're talking about is the state of someone that's functioning from a satisfactory level of, say, cognitive, meaning you're thinking, emotional, and behavioral adjustment. So this individual is able to enjoy their life and create some sense of a balance between work and all the other things that are happening. And the individual is also able to cope with the normal life stresses of life without having to seek out the support of someone like myself, right? A behavioral health person. Mental health is a spectrum. And so what that means, at any given moment, we could be moving towards optimal mental health where we're good. Or we could be moving towards mental illness because of maybe some stressors in the environment, what related to work or related to our personal lives, right? So if somebody dies, for example, if you have a family member that dies, obviously grief is going to be present. Maybe some level of depression is going to show up, and maybe some level of anxiety is going to be there. So at any given point in time, we could be moving along this spectrum. The subjectivity about mental health is this. We talk about symptoms of mental illness. The symptoms are subject to the individual. So an individual who may be struggling with a mental illness is going to say to you, it's an internal thing. I'm feeling sad. I'm having racing thoughts. I'm having excessive fear. I'm feeling fatigued. I've lost my appetite. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I'm having difficulty concentrating. I'm having suicidal thoughts. All of those things are going on inside the individual. We can't see that. We only know it because they say it to us, or we begin to observe some visible signs of the internal crisis. And so some of the signs that we will probably see, you'll notice that your worker, if we're taking it within the context of work, comes in looking very tired, and it's not normal for that person. Very irritable, they're disengaged from work, they're withdrawn, they may be exhibiting certain behaviors like somebody who would naturally associate and talk with their colleagues. You notice that for a while that they're isolating themselves, they're coming to work drunk, coming to work high, being hostile. They're not normally a hostile person, but they're showing up hostile. Poor deportment, they have poor hygiene, they're smelling, they're wearing the same clothes. You'll observe those things. But whatever is going on inside of the individual, the symptoms, it is subjective. And so how do you really measure subjectivity? That's the challenging piece about it. So unless somebody tells you what's going on with them, or you observe some of these signs, how do you really know? How do you quantify that?
This is fascinating. And we absolutely need subject matter experts like yourself to be able to help us make those types of observations. So, knowing that we have resources like yourself that are able to provide the subject matter expertise and help us dig into these symptoms and observations and be able to effectively address mental health in the workplace. What is the role of the environmental health and safety professional in mental health?
So this question comes up a lot. Again, I've been able to interface a lot with health and safety professionals when we attend those ASSP conferences. This is one of those conversations that keeps coming up. Like, what do you want me to do? Like, I'm not a therapist, and I always say we don't want you to become a therapist. We don't want you to become a mental health expert. You already have those people in place, right? My response to that particular question, Matt, is this. I break it down into three very basic things. Know your employees. Get familiar with your people. Don't just deal with your workers in passing, or don't just see them as you know, just a resource because of their skill sets. Get to know them as people, right? Because when you begin to know your workers, when you become familiar with them, you're able to spot when there's changes happening in this individual. You're able to spot if this individual is probably experiencing distress or they're experiencing a mental health crisis. There are going to be changes in their behavior, obviously. And if you're observing that, then be concerned enough, care enough to check in with your employee. Ask questions. How are you doing? And if the person comes to you and wants to talk to you about certain things, be willing to listen. Again, you're not here to fix anybody. You're not here to diagnose anything. You're just listening to what this person is saying, or you're asking if you're making an observation. And most important, be aware of the resources that your company has around mental health, right? So, employee assistance program may be something that's available. I believe a lot of employee assistance programs, they provide a few sessions for an employee to sit with a counselor if they're going through something. It's just being aware of being familiar with your worker, knowing your worker enough to observe if there are changes, being willing to ask questions, being willing to listen, and then providing them with the resources. Point them to HR, because more than likely HR is where they'll be able to have the conversations about what mental health resources are there. And that's it.
This is an important conversation that I think we've had in several different contexts in this profession. I know there's a lot of talk about making observations the humanistic side of safety. No, being able to deal with the human. And part of our jobs really is to continually make observations in the workplace. Those observations are usually of physical hazards, things that we can see and touch and smell that we know we're we have to address those things so that workers don't get hurt physically. So this is sort of adding on top of that.
Yeah.
We need to look for these
Really,
these
it's really expanding the narrative. I've always maintained that's what it comes down to. And it's not like I'm going in, Matt, to go like I'm just walking around with my glasses looking to see if anybody is falling apart. You know, if you have a worker who's always come to work, they do good work, they're focused, they're on time, and you observe this person coming to work for the last couple of days, looking, their affect is different. They seem exhausted, or they seem out of it, or they're wearing the same clothes that they wore the last couple of days, or they're smelling, or they're just not doing work as they used to. The quality of their work is going down. You're able to just check in with that person. That's really what it is. It's not they're intentionally looking to see is somebody going through a crisis. No, it's just observing. Matt's not showing up the way he always does. There's something different about him. I wonder what's going on with him. I want to check in with him. That's it.
makes sense. Absolutely. Now, what I do have to say is that this podcast has been primarily about research. So, can you tell me a little bit about how research informs your work?
Oh, 100%. So, number one, I rely heavily on research to be able to know stats. So, yeah, we do deal with data. We're not, we want to know what's happening, right? So, the state of mental health in the workplace, or just in general in the United States, because that's where we are, or globally, right? There are several organizations that I personally will look to gather information, such as the National Alliance on Mental Illness. There's a lot of information they put out in terms of, what are some of the mental illnesses that's common, and maybe the percentage of the population that might be dealing with this thing. The Centers for Disease Control also provides information on mental health. The World Health Organization, from a global standpoint, they provide details or statistics or data on the state of mental health in the world. Resources as well. What are the mental health resources that are available? We rely on research for this kind of information. And we also rely on research for evidence-based practices that informs how we show up in the therapy room with our clients, right? What are some of the practices, or what are some of the approaches that are best to help our clients navigate the challenges that they're dealing with? So research does inform us. I mean, when I did my program, there were people in my program that moved on to get a doctorate degree because they wanted to focus on the research side of things. So our field is significantly informed by research. We can't do without you guys.
So I'm glad that you're able to utilize research for this role and your work. A lot of times there are disconnects between research and practice. Between researchers, academics, clinicians, practitioners, we all have this very important role to play. But something that you and I had talked about before is that we sometimes become siloed. So, what is the problem here? And in your experience, how do we overcome this issue of siloing between all of our different roles?
Yeah. You know what, Matt? I just think it's a human nature to be completely preoccupied with our individual assignments, especially if it's something that you love to do. You're gonna be just focused entirely. We could put you in a room, like I'm in my private practice room every day working with clients, and I am perfectly fine just working with my clients. I have blinders on, I don't see anything else but my clients. So I think it really is a human nature to be like that, to tend to become siloed. I think collaboration takes intentionality. We got to be intentional if we want to collaborate with people. And I think it's also one of the things is that we may lack clarity about the value that we are adding, or the value that we need to seek out from others, right? So we don't necessarily see a pathway to connect, or we're not looking for a pathway to connect. So the people are in the lab doing their research. You're not necessarily looking, how can I connect the results that I'm getting to what's going on the outside, right? or providing the resources that I'm creating here to practitioners that may need it. We're not looking for those pathways intentionally. So how do we overcome it? I mean, I'm thinking it's important to maintain the big picture. We have to remember why we're doing what we're doing. Am I just doing research because I want to do research? What's the end game to the research that I'm doing? And what is the value that I'm looking to serve the community that's around me? How do I wish to add value to a practitioner like myself, right? And how do I, as a practitioner, obtain value? Because there's something that I need to do too. I need to step out of my little circle or my world to go get information. I know working within the context with environmental health and safety professionals, I know for you that that's very important. I know data for you is very important. And I respect that. So because I respect the fact that this is something that's important to you, I'm going to seek to engage you in that regard. I think it's important for us to integrate more. We need to put ourselves more in diverse rooms. So like doing like a crossover of some kind to discover value that's available and how I can provide value, right? So for me, like when I show up to a ASSP conference, I know that I'm going to be talking about something that's centering mental health and human needs and human challenges always. But I also go sit in other sessions where I'm learning about what else it is that's available or another area in which I could serve. I can't serve as a practitioner effectively if I'm not cognizant of what the needs are outside and what are the other resources that are available to help me become more effective at what I do. So I just think at the end of the day, we got to be, again, make sure we understand why we're doing what we're doing, but also how does what we do impact the bigger world around us, and how can we bring that information or bring that information out or bring that information in? That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And an observation that I've made is, you know, I have the benefit of being a practitioner that has turned into a researcher. So I know the value on both sides of the fence. But I also see, even for myself, the temptation to silo myself within that research. It's so easy for us to, and this is, I've talked about this before. Oftentimes, the product of research is that we need more research. And and we end up putting ourselves in this endless cycle of just doing continuous research. And eventually, if we aren't able to get ourselves out of that cycle, then that's just all we do, and it never ends up being useful to practice.
Mm,
And but I think it's on all sides of the fence here,
it is.
and there's an obligation for all of us to be able to cross that fence and make those connections and effectively integrate with each other. Now, one place where I think this is happening is in the field of total worker health. So, and I know that these efforts are being made to cross fences. We have researchers, practitioners, clinicians, you know, all of these different folks that are doing work in total worker health. What does that mean for you? How is total worker health helping our approach to mental health?
Sure. So when I think from again, EHS, OHS, getting into your world, generally traditional safety culture centers meeting OSHA's general duty clause. Ultimately, that's everything that it really comes down to. You want to make sure that you're creating a space for workers where the environment is free from recognized hazards, right? That could potentially cause death or it could cause serious physical harm. Again, traditionally, a lot of the emphasis has always been on the tangible stuff, the things that we could see, right? What I believe total worker health does, and I love it, and I pray somewhere in the future, Nash is able to come back fully. But one of the things that I really appreciate about total worker health is that it expands this narrative. It goes beyond just the physical focus. It's taking that comprehensive and holistic approach to worker well-being. It's making the worker central, right, to this whole process. It's not just only protecting the worker from physical harm, It's also looking to protect workers from psychological harm. That's the other piece. It's expanding again that narrative and not just protecting, but also looking to promote the overall health through best practices or protocols or procedures or whatever it is that you would refer to that as. I like the fact that it takes a systemic approach to promoting mental health. And so it's looking at the needs of workers, not just in the workspace only, but I think it considers how work impacts people outside of the workspace and how, again, what happens outside of the work environment with individuals may flow into the work environment itself. So I value total worker health because, as the name suggests, it's total worker health. We're not just looking at physical needs or physical protection. We're looking at this individual as a comprehensive, multi-dimensional being, because we are. And what is it that we can do to make sure that we're creating the best environments where they could come in and do work and show up as maybe their best selves? If they, we're not responsible. I'm not saying companies are responsible for people's stuff outside, but you definitely are responsible for the impact of what work does when they come into your work environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I am obviously a huge advocate for total worker health, and this discussion that we've had today is a huge part of that. And there's a ton of value here. Now, this next question, I think we've touched a little bit on already, but maybe maybe this is an opportunity to just kind of put it to bed. Let's talk about research to practice. So, in your experience, what are the challenges in research to practice? Why do we have these disconnects, and what can we possibly do better?
Yeah, so again, I really think it comes down to there's not a clear path between value added and value needed, right? As a practitioner, I am not fully aware, or it could be that I'm not fully aware of what research has to offer to me, right? And as researchers, you may not be fully aware of what it is that you do and how it could benefit somebody on the outside like myself. So we need to create a clear path. We need to be able to recognize that there is value to be added. So whatever I'm doing over here in research, I want it to have, it needs to have meaning. I'm not just, like you're saying, you're not just going, in your own world and you're just going down a rabbit hole because research requires more research. Okay, what are we doing with the stuff that we're getting? What are we going to be doing with the information that we're gathering? What are we doing with the conclusions and the results that we're obtaining? And how is it beneficial or applicable to the world outside of my research lab? Right? And if, as a practitioner, I am limited in my understanding or my ability to serve my community effectively, and I can get resource from research to help with that regard, then I'm obligated to go get that information. So I just think we need to create a clearer path. The siloed approach that we talked about before, I think, again, not much communication between the researcher and the practitioner. We need to communicate more. So does it mean that we need to probably create more forums in which we're intentionally saying we're bringing our goods to you and I'm coming to you to get your goods, to see how what you have could sync with my needs? Are the results, and I thought about this too, Dr. Matt, are the results being presented in a language that makes sense to practitioner? Because let's
Yeah.
be real. I mean, you guys are, it's like lawyers. The language, you have your own language that you as researchers understand. The
Hmm.
rest of us are clueless. So is the information palatable? Does it make sense? Can I digest it? Can I break it down so that it makes sense in my world to then be able to use that stuff? So maybe we probably need to do a little bit better at that. And integrating, again, putting yourself in diverse rooms where researchers are present, practitioners are present, educators are present, leaders are present. Let's come together in the same space to see the value that we can add to each other.
Yeah, and I know, so the value conversation is extremely important here. There's a part to this, and in speaking from the researcher perspective, there's a couple of different ways that we need to get out of our own heads about this. Number one is that language that you're talking about. It's very important for us to be able to translate research in a way that makes sense to the practitioner. I, I am
You know
I'm
what?
a
You tell me, what is that about, though?
yeah.
What
So
exactly is that about?
yeah, so I'm a self-taught statistician. I don't even call myself a full bore statistician, but I have learned how to do and interpret statistics for the research that I do. And I look at it every time and I know the work that I had to put into that to be able to understand that. It is my job now that I have that skill set to translate that into something that makes sense. If I walk into a room with practitioners and I start talking about multiple linear regression and t-tests and ANOVAs, and they're just, they're going to glaze over. They're not going to get it.
Exactly.
So I have to be able to say, okay, yes, the numbers are here and the numbers are important, but this is what they actually mean to practice. And this is how you need to think about it in your work. Now, the other thing that I'll say, as far as getting out of our own heads, is that, earlier I had mentioned that a lot of times research gets into this never ending cycle of we need more research, we need more research. Part of that, I think, ends up being a little bit of imposter syndrome and not seeing the value of the research that we've already done. So there have been things that I have published that, when I did the work, I know statistically this isn't a huge impact because of the limitations to the study. And yes, there may be statistical significance, but it's a very small number. But the value of those findings, even though I know more research is needed, the value of those findings, by just communicating that to the practitioners, they have said, wow, this is really good stuff. This is stuff that we need to know to continue to move forward. Let us take this and put it into practice and try it and see if your study holds up. That way you're not having the researchers aren't having to do all the work here. There's definitely room for some synergies, I think, between practitioners and researchers to make this an easier process for all of us. And we can't silo ourselves or get stuck in our own heads about it.
No, I certainly agree with you 100%. Again, maybe it's being a little bit more intentional with getting into the same spaces
Mm-hmm.
and having more conversation.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, I know we wanted to discuss something that's important to you that you're going to be working on very soon. As a matter of fact, I think you might be working on this already. So, when you and I spoke before, we had discussed critical incident response and helping workers after a traumatic event. Now, for me, I continually advocate that environmental health and safety professionals should be focused on prevention and not response. We're not the heroes that fly in and save the day when something bad happens. We're the ones that keep the bad from happening in the first place, even though it's not as visible or as sexy as emergency response. No one writes an action movie about safety professionals. So even so, it's important to talk about this response, and especially from a mental health standpoint. So tell me what this means for you and your work now and in the future.
Yeah. So Matt, I really believe reflecting and planning for incident response is just as important as focusing on incident prevention. Because the truth is, whether we want it to happen or not, accidents, incidents, near misses, whatever you refer to them as, they happen. Even with the best of prevention practices and protocols, you still have those things happening. Why? Because you're dealing with humans. Your technology could be good, your machinery could be good, your equipment could be good. The one anomaly or that one variable is always a human being. And so we know for sure that there is a clear connection between someone's psychological state and the risk of injury or a fatality occurring, right? If your head is not in the game from an emotional standpoint, if you're at home and you are dealing with marital issues, or your kids are giving you a hard time, or you have parents who are sick and you're having to attend to that, that is something that weighs on you even coming into the workspace. And you could compartmentalize your life as much as you want to or try to. The capacity for you to experience an injury is going to be higher when you are not when you're not psychologically present in the moment, right? We can't separate the person from the worker. I think it's cognizant that we recognize this, that more people are coming into the workspace where, again, 4 out of 10 is complaining or are complaining that they're struggling with severe mental illness, whether it's anxiety, depression, substance use, whether it's suicidal ideation. There is a significant increase, especially since COVID-19. We know that to be a fact. And so the risk of a traumatic event occurring is a lot higher now than it was maybe a few years ago. We know suicide, for example, is extremely significant, particularly in the construction arena. I know the construction arena struggles with that a lot. In fact, the level of suicide is 4 times higher in construction comparative to the other industries. It's not just the individual who dies. It's not just the individual who will have an accident that is impacted. Workers, co-workers, colleagues, auxiliary staff, they're also going to be affected if there is a traumatic event that occurs, if there is a suicide that occurs. So, in my capacity at the moment, I am working on an individual level. I deal with stress management, coping strategies to address mental illness, promoting self-care, doing psychoeducation. And then at the organizational level, I will go in and I will do trainings or presentations, webinars, etc., with the intent of amplifying literacy around mental health and what a crisis response could look like from a very basic standpoint. And then also promoting psychological health and safety in the work environment. But one of the things that I also considered when I did I spoke on a panel at the ASSP conference recently in Orlando, and we were talking about suicide prevention and what's the role of the EHS professional. And one of the questions I was asked is, in the aftermath of a traumatic event, how do we respond? What do we do? And it had me thinking that this is something that we also have to give credence to, because again, your incident response typically focuses on addressing the physical things that have happened in the environment. Not much credence is really given to then how do we support our workers, because there's going to be an impact. There's either going to be post-traumatic stress disorder that you're dealing with, or some kind of stress is going to be affecting your workers. What do we have in place to take care of that? And what you provide could vary, but the conversation needs to be had. And I believe the same way you would have an incident response plan in place to address all of the physical implications, it's also important that there is something that you have on the books, some kind of protocol that you have in place to take care or tend to the mental health concern of your workers. And not just your workers, your leaders who are going to have to take the lead in the event something happens. I had a conversation with an EHS. I think he is the head of the department, if I'm not mistaken, and he was sharing about an incident that occurred a few years ago. His company was typically rated as one of the safest companies, but an accident occurred and somebody died on the spot, and there were workers who were working in conjunction with this individual when it occurred. And I remember he mentioned to me, of course, that became his responsibility. And he had to set aside himself and all of what he was dealing with, the trauma from the experience, the shock of the experience. He had to push that to the side because he had to give his full attention to everybody else and everything else that was happening. And when I asked him, what would you have done differently in the aftermath? He said, at least in the first 48 hours, I would have taken a time out, paused, go sit in front of somebody and have a conversation about me, right? He said, I had no idea about this. One of the other things he shared with me was that the workers who were working alongside the individual who died very tragically, they insisted on finishing up the task because they wanted to do it in honor of the worker who died. And it was one of the employees' spouses who reached out to him and said, this is not working. It's not working. He's coming home and this is what's going on with him. So these are things he said in hindsight he would have done differently. And I'm wondering if there was a response plan in place to kind of offer some guide, if there was some pre-training in place to help, organizational leaders have an idea of what distress would look like for your employees post a traumatic event. Would that have made a difference? And so that's an area where I definitely wanted to start doing. I'm focusing on doing some more work, really helping organizational leaders understand the psychological implications in the aftermath of a traumatic experience, what it means for your workers. Not everybody is going to probably deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. Depending on your level of resilience, you might not be affected in any way. But we don't know that that will be the case for everybody. So why not put some measures in place to ensure that our managers are trained, they have some idea of what distress is going to look like, how can people cope with the challenges that they're dealing with, and addressing, making sure support is there, and of the resources that are available at hand for you to pull in if something were to occur. Because again, we are putting measures in place to prevent stuff, but you never know when something could go wrong.
Yeah, very important discussion. I know there are a ton of EHS professionals, EHS functions out there that are also responsible for building emergency response teams and doing business continuity plans. I feel like if this part, the mental health part, in the aftermath of a traumatic experience or an incident or anything, is not part of those plans, you're not going to be as resilient or as recoverable as it looks like on paper.
No, you won't. And I'll tell you, as I was doing my own research, one of the things that I came across is the idea of the level of stress that you deal with every day, just small increments, it wears away at your level of resilience. And you never know, it could just take like a feather to make you fall apart because stress is consistently building, right? I had an opportunity in 2022 to partner with L'Oreal, their New Jersey office. I was asked to come in to do some work with their emergency response team because they said, listen, we know how to deal with some of these physical issues, but we have no clue about mental health and what are some of the things that we need to be looking for and what some basic response would look like. Again, I didn't do the training trying to make these people into experts. Far from it, but at least having some knowledge or some insight into what a crisis could look like and what are some of the things that we could do to help our employees in the interim for them to go get some support from a professional. But that conversation is absolutely important, and I'm really hoping that more and more leaders in this space will respond to it. I did a podcast with two ladies who are EHS professionals, and I remember, one of them said to me that she brought up in the conversation that I believe she's been working in the field for maybe about 10 years. She's seen 4 deaths. She said, in fact, the first time she encountered an employee dying, she babysat the body until the medical examiner came.
Wow.
She said, Georgia, in all the years I've worked in this field, no one has ever asked me after an incident, how are you doing? Do you need mental health resources? There are no trainings available. Nobody prepared me coming into this field for the possibility that I was going to see dead bodies that I'd have to babysit, or I would be seeing limbs being torn off of people. I was never prepared for that. And when she said it to me, I was blown away because I'm like, that is wild. Again, this is one of the reasons why I really want to position myself to come in and provide support in this regard in whatever way I can.
Yeah, that's awesome. Again, it's super important. As much as EHS professionals need to be focused on the prevention part, we are also in that position where if something does happen, we probably will find ourselves sitting there with an injured person or, God forbid, a body. And that is a traumatic experience to prepare for and to address. So, yeah, extremely important work. And I'm really glad that you're doing something in this space. So, Georgia, this has been a fantastic discussion. Where can folks connect with you and learn more about you and your work?
Sure. So I am prolific on LinkedIn. It's a matter of just reaching out to me, sending me a message in inbox on LinkedIn. You could do that, and you can also visit my website, where you can connect with me on my website as well. That address it's simple, BFAT PLLC.com. It is the acronym for my business, Building Families According to Pattern.
Okay. And I will make sure that we put that link in the episode notes. So, Georgia, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I'm so glad that we have folks like you that are bridging these gaps between the EHS profession, practice, research, and mental health. And I think it's I think it's important work that we're going to have to explore moving forward. So, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Matt. And I definitely enjoy being with my EH. In fact, I'll tell you, I spend more time with my EHS and OHS professionals than I do my actual colleagues in therapy. I think maybe because of my engineering background, that's where I started. So for you, you guys are like family for me, honestly. So thank you for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation. And again, I am committed to doing whatever I need to do in my capacity to help support this environment.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming today. I know this will be an interesting discussion for our listeners. So, and definitely invite our listeners to follow up and connect with you. Folks, in all seriousness, I am a huge advocate for therapy-based approaches to mental well-being. I used to think I didn't need it, then I tried it. Sure, I have close confidants that I can vent to about all my frustrations, but there is nothing like talking to someone who is clinically trained to help you through your quirks, your hangups, and everything else you have going on. And yeah, we have to think about this for our workers too. If you have questions about how this approach overlaps with workplace safety, I definitely encourage you to reach out to Georgia. As always, if you have research that you want to share on this podcast, whether it's your own or just a really cool study you found or some research you've been able to effectively put into practice, send me an email at contact@proveitpod.com. Until next time, I'm Dr. Matt Law. Thanks for listening to the Prove It To Me podcast. Take care and stay safe, everyone. Prove It To Me is produced by me, Matt Law. Original music by Wes London. You can find this podcast on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. Like what you've heard so far? Please like, subscribe, and follow wherever you get your podcasts, and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Got questions about what we talked about or research that you want to share? Send an email to contact@proveitpod.com. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and its guests and do not necessarily represent the official position, opinion, or strategies of their employers or companies. Examples of research and data analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based on very limited, often single use case, and sometimes dated information. Assumptions made within this discussion about research and data analyses are not necessarily representative of the position of the host, the guests, or their employers or companies. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast. The presentation of the content by the guests does not necessarily constitute an active endorsement of the content by the host.